This is the Bible Book Club podcast.
The book of Ezra.
Welcome to the club.
Last time in chapters 5 and 6 of Ezra, the first wave of exiles had been experiencing a lot of opposition, maybe similar to us. So God intervened behind the scenes, providentially paving the way for the exiles to rebuild. First, he sent support in the form of two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. Then, a new Persian governor named Tattenai arrived. He asked fair questions and sent to the king for answers to verify the truth. The king dug into it and discovered that Cyrus had decreed the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple. God brought the truth to light through another Persian king, King Darius, who issued a decree to protect the returned exiles. Due to God's providence, the opposition was halted and the temple was completed.
Well, there are several patterns I want to cover in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah before we dig in. For example, each of the three returns to Judah involved some kind of building. In Ezra chapters 1 through 6, we discussed the first wave of exiles led by Zerubbabel. Now, Zerubbabel focused on building the temple so they could worship. In these next 4 chapters, we will discuss the second wave led by Ezra. Ezra will focus on building the faith of the people. They must be faithful to God and follow his commands, or exile will once again be their fate. The last wave of exiles will be covered in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah will focus on building the wall. So building the temple, building the faith, building the wall to protect them from their enemies. Now, another pattern between all three of these rebuilds is that each return begins with a decree from one of the kings of Persia. Each leader will face opposition of some kind, and each leader will be victorious in overcoming the opposition. However, each victory will fall short of providing the king, the kingdom, and the community that God has planned for us from the beginning in Genesis. So when we arrive at the end of each of these returns to Jerusalem, the victories fall a little flat. In our last episode, the exiles in the first wave completed the foundation of the temple, and some people cried. Then they completed the rest of the temple, and one thing was tragically missing: the cloud. There was no mention of the cloud filling the temple as it had before. For Moses, the cloud came at the completion of the tabernacle.
In Exodus 40:34, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle.
And for Solomon, the same thing happened at the completion of the temple.
In 1 Kings 8:10, when the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord.
The cloud, or glory of the Lord, represented God's presence with his people. The absence of the cloud suggests that the second temple was lacking. Now, Ezekiel, another prophet we're going to get to later in the Bible, actually lived 100 years before Ezra. So there's a good chance that Ezra had read what Ezekiel wrote about this vision that he had. And in this vision given by God to him, he sees this man clothed in linen, who is possibly Jesus, and cherubim departing from the temple with a cloud. In other words, the presence of God was leaving the temple. Listen, this is so interesting.
In Ezekiel chapter 10, I looked and I saw the likeness of a throne of lapis lazuli above the vault that was over the heads of the cherubim. The Lord said to the man clothed in linen, "Go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim, fill your hands with burning coals from among the cherubim, and scatter them over the city." And as I watched, he went in. Now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was full of the radiance of the glory of the Lord.
All right, we're going to skip the next 4 paragraphs from Ezekiel because he's just going to describe the cherubim and their movement.
And then continuing in Ezekiel 10, verse 18, then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. While I watched, the cherubim spread their wings and rose from the ground as they went. The wheels went with them. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was above them.
So Ezekiel saw a linen-clad man sprinkle coals over Jerusalem. This indicated judgment, which has already happened. Judgment has come. The first temple was destroyed. Then the cloud filled the temple, and the glory of the Lord moved from the Holy of Holies to the door of the temple, and he left. The vision represented the end of an era. God's presence, which had dwelt in the temple since Solomon built it, was gone because of Israel's unfaithfulness and idolatry. That's the vision Ezekiel saw. Back to the present story. So the cloud, the glory of the Lord, did not fill the second temple. What does this mean? The hope that the exiles have returned to is the hope of the promises. The Davidic covenant promise of a great king, the Messiah. The Mosaic covenant promise that God would dwell among them. However, those promises were contingent upon the people's faith and obedience. The fact that God did not inhabit the second temple leads us to ask, are the people still in a kind of spiritual exile? Can Ezra fix this problem? I don't think I would want this job. Let me explain. Ezra's task of leading the people to God was a challenging and impossible one. In fact, after studying the past great leaders who had struggled in the same position, people like Moses, Aaron, Elijah, Elisha, being CPO, or what I call chief priest officer, of a nation that had consistently failed in its sole objective of faithfulness to God would require a man of fearless faith or a crazy person. Ezra was a man of fearless faith because he was qualified, equipped, and called. Note to us, if you are called, you're hired. So whether Ezra wanted the job or not, he got it. Whether you are qualified or successful is not the point. The only point is that God will use you in his greater plan. It may look like a mess, a fail, a disaster. But on the other side of eternity, we know that God is weaving all things together for good. I say all this because remember I mentioned in the beginning, all 3 of these waves of return had victories, but they fell a little bit short. Ezra was called and Ezra was obedient to God. But sometimes obedience to God doesn't always feel like a victory. Sometimes it's painful. And we're going to get to that in our next episode when obedience brings heartbreak. Scene 1 of this episode, Ezra arrived with a resume.
Ezra, chapter 7. After these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Marioth, the son of Zeariah, the son of Uzi, the son of Buki, the son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the chief priest. This Ezra came up from Babylon.
All right, it is about 458 BC, about 80 years after the first return led by Zerubbabel. And there has been a change in Persian kings. In our last episode, King Darius decreed to Tattenai that the Jews were to be supported. In this episode, the current king is Artaxerxes, which means we have chronologically passed the book of Esther, for she married Artaxerxes' father, King Xerxes, about 479 BC. Now, Artaxerxes is not Esther's son. Xerxes' principal wife was Amestris, and she was the mother of Artaxerxes. Amestris was known for cruelty, but Esther was known for being kind and for saving the Jews. Perhaps Artaxerxes was influenced by Esther, not his mother, because Artaxerxes has a soft spot for Ezra and his people, one he most likely did not get from his cruel mother. Ezra gives deference to the king by announcing him first before launching into his own impressive lineage, which links straight back to Aaron himself. Now, this list is a much abbreviated lineage list, but he hits the most prestigious priests in the lineage. Hilkiah was a priest during the reign of King Josiah, and Zadok was a prominent priest during the reign of David. In our last episode, Joshua was the 24th high priest, if you include Aaron as the first. Ezra is a descendant of the 22nd high priest, Sariah, and clearly he is very proud of it. But you must remember, Ezra is not the high priest, but he is not just any priest either. Ezra is a priest of distinction because,
continuing in Ezra chapter 7, verse 6, he was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Some of the Israelites, including priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, and temple servants, also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He had begun his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month. For the gracious hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord, and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel.
Ezra wrote a lot of impressive facts about himself. If we didn't know him, we might think he's arrogant. However, recall that Ezra loves to include supporting documentation in his books. Point in case, there were 65 chapters in Chronicles. Ezra is simply doing what he does best. He's building a case. He was a priest born to the priesthood. He was a teacher well-versed in the law of Moses. The king gave him everything he asked. The hand of the Lord was upon him, and he had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law. In verse 10, the translation, he devoted himself, could be stronger. A more meaningful translation for the phrase would be, he had set his heart. It implies that Ezra had a deliberate positioning of his heart. Like David, a man after God's heart, Ezra loves God, and for all these reasons, he has built a case why he is the man to do this job. The point is, Ezra lived what Ezra loved. He sought God's laws. He practiced God's principles, and now God would use him to lead others in God's plan. The sequence matters. If we want to live what we love, we must know God's word. We must practice God's principles. Then and only then will God use us to lead others in God's plan. The law of Moses was to the exiles what the Bible is to us. We must know it to know and love God. There's another parallel to point out as an example to us in this little part of our lesson. Ezra was greatly used by God because Ezra found favor. It mentions that Ezra was well versed in the law of Moses, that he had found favor with the king, and that the hand of God was upon him. The progression, again another sequence, reminds me of another great teacher, one who developed in a similar manner.
Luke chapter 2, verse 52. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man.
Wisdom, or to know God, is to know the word. Ezra knew God because Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord. If growing in wisdom worked well for Ezra and for Jesus, surely it is a good model for us to follow. Hence the purpose of Bible Book Club. We are growing in wisdom on this journey through the Bible. It is not an easy study, but my prayer is that we find favor with God and man along the way. Back to our story. Ezra has been diligently preparing. He is the leader Israel needs for such a time as this. and God is already going before him to pave the way, because Ezra has found favor in Persia, the greatest empire of his time. Scene 2, Ezra receives a reference from the king. And this wasn't just any reference. Artaxerxes hands Ezra the keys to the kingdom of Judah in the form of a letter. Ezra presents this letter to all those in power in the provinces around Jerusalem.
Verse 11. This is a copy of the letter King Artaxerxes had given to Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law, a man learned in matters concerning the commands and decrees of the Lord for Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, teacher of the law of God of heaven.
Okay, so just to point out before she goes any further, even the king of Persia praises the credentials of this priest, teacher, and learned man. How did a captive rise to such trust and admiration with the king of the greatest empire? It has to be faithful obedience on Ezra's part, and of course, God, who controls even kings.
Continuing in verse 12. Greetings. Now I decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including priests and Levites who volunteer to go to Jerusalem with you, may go. You are sent by the king and his 7 advisors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. Moreover, you are to take with you the silver and gold that the king and his advisors have freely given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, together with all the silver and gold you may obtain from the province of Babylon, as well as the freewill offerings of the people and priests for the temple of their God in Jerusalem. With this money, be sure to buy bulls, rams, and male lambs, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and sacrifice them on the altar of the temple of your God in Jerusalem. You and your fellow Israelites may then do whatever seems best with the rest of the silver and gold, in accordance with the will of your God. Deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles entrusted to you for worship in the temple of your God, and anything else needed for the temple of your God that you are responsible to supply. You may provide from the royal treasury.
First, the king speaks to those in Persia. He decrees that any Israelite may volunteer to go, and that they are to go with gifts to the God of Israel. The king gave silver and gold. The province of Babylon was to give silver and gold, and the people were to make a freewill offering for the temple. Then the king addresses all the treasurers of the Trans-Euphrates, which was the land beyond the Euphrates River. These were the provinces that Persia had acquired.
Continuing in verse 21. Now I, King Artaxerxes, decree that all the treasurers of the Trans-Euphrates are to provide with diligence whatever Ezra the priest, the teacher of the law of the God of heaven, may ask you, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of olive oil, and salt without limit. Whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence for the temple of the God of heaven. Why should his wrath fall on the realm of the king and of his sons? You are also to know that you have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of the priests, Levites, musicians, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers at this house of God.
So the king decrees that the provinces supply Ezra with whatever he needs. And the king takes away any right the provinces thought they had to tax Israel. Why? Because he does not want to incur the wrath of Ezra's God. Ezra must be a very convincing teacher. Again, I have to wonder if Esther's story and faith also played a role. I just wish we knew how much access, if any, Esther had to her husband's son, King Artaxerxes. Lastly, the king grants Ezra authority to rule over all the people, not only in Jerusalem, but also over those who follow the laws of God.
Continuing in verse 25, and you, Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer justice to all the people of Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of your God. And you are to teach any who do not know them. Whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment.
Artaxerxes gave Ezra unprecedented authority. He gave him civil control, or authority over all who know the laws of your God, power to appoint magistrates and judges, authority to teach the law to those who don't know it, power to impose punishments, including death, banishment, confiscation, and imprisonment. He gave Ezra financial control, including unlimited access to the royal treasury, up to 100 talents of silver, authority to take whatever else is needed for God's temple, and tax exemption for all temple personnel. He also gave Ezra religious control, complete freedom to establish worship according to Jewish law, authority to enforce religious compliance, power to purify and organize the community. His authority, a gift, was really a miracle. Scene 3. Ezra praised the God who made the return possible.
Verse 27. Praise be to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, who has put it into the king's heart to bring honor to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in this way, and who has extended his good favor to me before the king and his advisors and all the king's powerful officials. Because the hand of the Lord my God was on me, I took courage and gathered leaders from Israel to go up with me.
Ezra used a lot of white space at the beginning of this chapter, detailing his qualifications to build a case for what he humbly states clearly here. The credit for his success was not what he had done. It was what God had done through him. The God that had always been theirs moved the heart of the king to bring honor to Jerusalem and favor to Ezra. Because of all that God had done, Ezra took courage and acted. Note to us, that is the wonder of our relationship with God. He equips those who faithfully study and lovingly obey his word to make a lasting impact on the world. But when he does, we must take notice and praise him as Ezra did, so the world may know. Scene 4. Ezra leads a list of exiles home.
Chapter 8. These are the family heads and those registered with them who came up with me from Babylon during the reign of King Artaxerxes. Of the descendants of Phinehas, Gershom. Of the descendants of Ithamar, Daniel. Of the descendants of David, Hattush. Of the descendants of Shechaniah. Of the descendants of Parosh, Zechariah, and with him were registered 150 men. Of the descendants of Pahath-Moab, Elionai, son of Zeruiah, and with him 200 men. Of the descendants of Zattu, Shechaniah, son of Jahaziel, and with him 300 men. Of the descendants of Adin, Ebed, son of Jonathan, and with him 50 men. Of the descendants of Elam, Jeshiah, son of Athaliah, and with him 70 men. Of the descendants of Shephatiah, Zebediah, son of Michael, and with him 80 men. Of the descendants of Joab, Obadiah, son of Jehiel, and with him 218 men. Of the descendants of Bani, Shelomith, son of Josephiah, and with him 160 men. Of the descendants of Bebai, Zechariah, son of Bebai, and with him 28 men. Of the descendants of Azgad, Johanan, son of Haktan, and with him 110 men. Of the descendants of Adonikam, the last ones, whose names were Eliphalet, Jeuel, and Shemaiah, and with them 60 men. Of the descendants of Bigvai, Uthai, and Zachar, with them 70 men.
The list contained about 1,500 Jews from 15 different families. It's a much smaller group than the 42,360 that returned with Zerubbabel. However, this group had a high calling. They must restore worship and lead the people back to faith in God. Scene 5. Ezra can't leave without Levites.
Verse 15. I assembled them at the canal that flows toward Ahava, and we camped there 3 days. When I checked among the people and the priests, I found no Levites there. So I summoned Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jerib, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Meshullam, who were leaders, and Joiarib and Elnathan, who were men of learning, and I ordered them to go to Iddo, the leader in Casaphia. I told them what to say to Iddo and his fellow Levites, the temple servants in Casaphia, so that they might bring attendance to us for the house of our God. Because the gracious hand of our God was on us, they brought us Sherebiah, a capable man from the descendants of Mahali, son of Levi, the son of Israel, and Sherebiah's sons and brothers, 18 in all, and Hashabiah, together with Jesiah, from the descendants of Merari, and his brothers and nephews, 20 in all. They also brought 220 of the temple servants, a body that David and all the officials had established to assist the Levites. All were registered by name.
In every trip, there's always a good chance that you forgot something. Sometimes you can live without it, and sometimes you can't. And Ezra cannot live without the Levites. They are crucial to the mission of leading the people in worship, because they are crucial to God's instructions for caring for the temple. Ezra executes orders, and with God's hand upon him, 38 Levites and 220 temple servants are assembled and ready to go. Scene 6, Ezra prepares with prayer.
Verse 21, there, by the Ahava Canal, I proclaimed a fast so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children with all our possessions. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies on the road, because we had told the king, the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him, but his great anger is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer.
This small confession is so human, it's actually kind of cute. Ezra did not feel comfortable asking the king for a security detail for the trip because Ezra had boasted to the king that God's hand was upon them. So why would he need a security detail? So to put his trust where his mouth was, he prayed that God would indeed protect them.
Verse 24, then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, namely Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their brothers, and I weighed out to them the offering of silver and gold and the articles that the king, his advisors, his officials, and all Israel present there had donated for the house of our God. I weighed out to them 650 talents of silver articles weighing 100 talents, 100 talents of gold, 20 bowls of gold valued at 1,000 derricks, and 2 fine articles of polished bronze as precious as gold. I said to them, you, as well as these articles, are consecrated to the Lord. The silver and gold are a free will offering to the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord in Jerusalem before the leading priests and Levites and the family heads of Israel. Then the priests and Levites received the silver and gold and sacred articles that had been weighed out to be taken to the house of our God in Jerusalem.
Ezra carefully divided the treasure between 12 trusted priests before they left. Scene 7, Ezra and the second wave of exiles return.
Verse 31, on the 12th day of the first month, we set out from the Ahava Canal to go to Jerusalem. The hand of our God was on us, and he protected us from enemies and bandits along the way. So we arrived in Jerusalem, where we rested 3 days. On the 4th day, in the house of our God, we weighed out the silver and gold and the sacred articles into the hands of Miramoth, son of Uriah the priest. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with him, and so were the Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Nodiah, son of Binnui. Everything was accounted for by number and weight, and the entire weight was recorded at that time. Then the exiles who had returned from captivity sacrificed burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 male lambs, and as a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. They also delivered the king's orders to the royal satraps and to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, who then gave assistance to the people and to the house of God.
So Ezra wastes very little ink on the journey or on their arrival. A journey that we discussed in episode 1 would have been incredibly difficult. He skips all of that. It doesn't matter to him because Ezra has finally arrived on the job. And he is all about the business. Treasures delivered, sacrifices offered, royal orders distributed. Check, check, done. But what happens when you think you've arrived only to discover the real work is just beginning? In our next episode, the calm, orderly Ezra will lose it. Tune in to find out why Ezra is tearing his clothes and pulling out his hair.
One of my personal Bible benders is how every book builds on the ones before. So if you're new here or you just skipped ahead, go back and listen to some of the previous seasons of Bible Book Club. You will find Bible benders too. And if you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you and all your friends can listen and discuss. New episodes drop every Monday.